So I will go ahead and let Jodi introduce herself.
Yeah, good morning. So my name is Jodi Clary. I've been a trooper with the Highway Patrol for 20 years. I'll give you a little of my history and bear with me because this is my first online Zoom presentation that I've done. So yeah, so I became a trooper in 2004. Initially, I was in the Junction City, Manhattan area, worked the road, normal trooper duties in after about 13, 14 years, I went to our training center for a while, realized I really enjoyed training. Life happens. I got relocated up to Doniphan County, where I worked the road for a little bit, got remarried, moved up there. And then back in 2022, October of 22, I became the public resource officer for the Troop B area, which is the entire northeast part of the state. Does not include Kansas City. That's their own separate one. But so what I do now is mainly safety education. And so today, what I'm talking to you about is usually how I present it. It's like an awareness and self-defense class. But I've catered it a little bit to be appropriate for today's training, hopefully be a little more applicable for something you might use. But we're gonna try to work through this. I hope that it works out okay, and we'll try to figure it out from here. So there's my contact information, and hopefully that's our only hiccup. But if it works out like everything else I do, it won't be. But if you have any questions, or typically when I do this type of training, it is in person, and if you have any questions, hopefully it generates questions because it makes it better training for everybody. But with my contact information, if you'd like me to come to your company or your agency or whatever it is and actually give you some techniques, tactics, work through some stuff, that is something that commonly accompanies this. Now, since I am just in the Troop B area, I don't travel all over the state, but I do have contact information for the other ones, and maybe it's something that they would let me travel to a certain area of the state for. But most of my background was in defense tactics as it pertains to law enforcement. So you'll hear a few examples and stuff as it pertains to my world there, but we'll try to keep it zoned in on how it applies to you. So we will move forward with this presentation. Like I said, I kind of catered it to home healthcare workers, but I don't know y'all's world. I know my world, and I know like my own personal self-defense stuff and awareness. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But our objectives today, hopefully we're going to recognize some of the potential dangers that are in home health care, establishing and maintaining that awareness, some strategies for a safer environment, and some tactics and potential targets when we're responding to those incidences. So I'm guessing most of you became a home health provider to help the patient. Like that is something that I actually have some experience with. My mother-in-law at the time was, in her upper 80s. She lived with us, and she would get sick, and thankfully the health department would come out after, help us get her through her physical therapy and stuff that she needed to do, get her adapted back into life, living here with us. So I greatly appreciate what you all do. It's definitely a calling, just like my job, but definitely something that you are probably very passionate about. But the last thing that you expect, probably, unless it's something that has happened to you, is to be prepared to defend yourself. Now, if you worked in a hospital environment, it's probably likely that you've encountered something like that when people come into the ER, if they're impaired in some fashion, something like that. But if it's something in the home health world, if that's all you worked, maybe that's not something, or maybe you're new to the job. Maybe that's not something you've experienced yet. So hopefully today's training will give you some some things that you can do, some things that you can start to implement, and maybe make some better habits if you aren't already doing them. So typically, when I do classes, we ask for feedback, and we would go over what are some of the dangers of providing healthcare in a patient's home. And again, that's not my world. I don't live it. But I tried to, when I was creating this presentation, I tried to put myself in the situation of, even when I respond to a call as law enforcement, what are some of the things that I would want to know or want to do going into this person's home? Obviously, our worlds are a little different because I'm prepared for that threat. I'm usually almost anticipating that threat. But I would think that even the basics are pretty much the same for you folks going into somebody's home. So obviously the environment's going to be unknown. You won't know the general layout, you'll know the entrance, obviously, when you're allowed to come into the home, but you won't know what the other exits are, where you can make yourself safe, where you can get out of that place. Obviously, you won't know the other occupants. We'll talk a little bit, and maybe at the end, and I'm going to take some notes here and there as well, what questions I come up with for you. What the case, I don't know if you guys get a case file and you're told like who they live with, what their basic statistics are, but you're not going to know necessarily who's all in that house or in that location at the time. You're not going to know not only the patient's purpose, which hopefully it's just to deal with their health, but you're definitely not going to know what the other occupants' purpose might be. You're probably not going to know how many are going to be there at a certain time. Like I said, we had home health come in frequently with my mother-in-law, and we got to a point where we tried to be here when somebody was here. She couldn't hear, so we were kind of there to help with that communication. But even so, we wanted her to feel safe, and we wanted the home health worker feeling safe because we do have animals. But we tried to keep them penned up, whatever it is, when they showed up. Obviously, driving up to our house with 2 state trooper cars in the driveway might feel pretty safe. I would hope that they felt pretty safe. But we just tried to be around to help establish that. So I imagine that that's not something that you folks know every time you go to a house, how many people are going to be there. Or maybe that's something that you establish ahead of time. Again, that's some of the questions that I don't necessarily know the answer to, but some more potential dangers are going to be that patient's state of mind. I guess I envision in most cases you're going to be dealing with elderly, and a common occurrence in elderly is going to be dementia. My grandma has it. She's never been violent with it, but she's like it's a complete reset. And although she's never been violent, she has demonstrated, that frustration. And I can imagine that it's something that can build and is something that can be a potential threat. Obviously, the mental health, the well-being of the subject. You're not necessarily always dealing with elderly, I wouldn't imagine. So are you dealing with folks that are potentially impaired? Are they on some type of medication or some type of drug? You never know that. So those are just some of the potential dangers. Obviously, going into a person's home, they could potentially have weapons. They are familiar with where those weapons are at. You aren't necessarily familiar with where those weapons might be. And again, hopefully it's not something that escalates into that situation, but maybe it's not necessarily the patient. Maybe it's some of those unknown occupants and they're not happy with what's going on. So those are just potential things, not to put you all on edge all the time, but we'll give you some of that awareness and some of those skills to maybe address those situations. So when we talk about weapons, again, if we're doing this in person, I would try to demonstrate what some things that that could be used as a weapon, but in reality, anything can be used as a weapon. We're talking now, we'll talk about what you can potentially use as a weapon, but lamps, things that might be right next to somebody sitting in what I would envision is a living room or a bedroom environment that could be used as a weapon. Things like, candles. My mother-in-law had candles in her room. Those could be, that sounds kind of silly, but those are things that could potentially be used as a weapon. That in most people's mind, that's not necessarily the case, but those are the way, that's kind of the way I'm going to try to get you to think, is that potentially anything could be used as a weapon if somebody's driven enough to use it. Obviously, the pets. Hopefully people are responsible with it. They put their pets up, whatever it is, but that might not be the case. You might have to deal with the situation as it comes. And then obviously, probably in most cases, only one time when somebody came out here, they had their well, it wasn't only one time, but they would often have their supervisor with them on the first visit. And then they would come in and then it'd be solo work from there. So again, I'm not sure how each company, how each agency operates, but I would imagine that in most cases you're working as the only person in that case, or maybe you switch the case back and forth. But I would imagine in most cases you're by yourself, which can potentially be very dangerous. So we're going to talk about preparing and responding. We're going to talk about before, and in my experience, preparation and what you do ahead of time is doesn't necessarily outweigh what you do during a threat or attack, but it is huge and key in making your response not only effective, but appropriate. So training is going to be huge. We're going to talk about that in a couple of different ways. Preparation and all that's good. It's going to be very key in what we do. And then we'll talk a little bit about after, but again, that's probably going to be more agency or company specific. So we'll just give you some general ideas. Now, before, when we talk about preparedness, we'll get into it a lot more, but we're going to talk about that mental Rolodex. Again, I've been doing this job for 20 years, almost 21, so I'm not a spring chicken by any means, and I know what a mental Rolodex is. There are some people and maybe even on here that don't necessarily know what that is because they're kind of young. A Rolodex, basically, the way I try to describe it to other folks that don't know what that is like computer files. Your brain is set up like a bunch of computer files, and the quicker it can access something, the quicker it can react to a problem or whatever the incident is. So we'll talk about that mental Rolodex, that preparedness as it pertains to that. We'll talk about some training. We'll talk about our mindset, and again, that awareness and that preparation. Okay, so when we're preparing, again, I try to put myself in your shoes. What would I do if I had been assigned this case, or if I had been assigned this person to care for, and how would I go about preparing for this from a personal safety standpoint? So the internet, you can gain so much information from the internet. And I do this when I'm doing background investigations on people. Obviously, that's something that we would look into, what they're putting out there for everybody to see. But even if it's just an individual that I was investigating on a traffic stop for something, you might check out, if it's somebody that we've found drugs on or something like that, and likely they're going to have something on their social media accounts. Maybe, obviously in our world, we can run certain records and it gives us their criminal history. But typically with Google, you're not going to find criminal history unless it's maybe a registered offender of some type. So that's where I would start. If I put myself in your shoes and I was given a case and I was given a person that I was assigned to, that would probably be one of the first things I would do is, and Again, maybe that's something that you're not allowed to do within your company or your agency. That might be something that you have to check. But I would do my research on them as far as, what are have they been involved in anything that's made news? Obviously, that's something that I would want to know. But not only can Google provide information about the person, when you're getting directions to that house, look at the layout, like look where the streets are. Is it a one-way street that you have to go in this way? So then if I have to leave in a hurry, which way am I going to be a least danger to everybody else or to myself? If I have to park a certain way, where would be the safest place for me to park? Am I going to a multiple housing residence, like an apartment or something? Where's going to be the best place for me to park, not only to gain access to them, but also in the event that something goes wrong and I have to get to my car in a hurry. So that might seem a little extreme, but those are just some potential things that you might look at. If it's a residence, a single house or maybe a duplex or something like that, are you able to gain a street view from that to kind of gain where, yes, the door is that you're likely going to go in, but in addition to that, where's maybe windows that you might exit? Maybe there's another door in the back of the house or the side of the house that if you get stuck in there, you can try to gain access to potentially get out. Again, that case file, I'm not sure how in depth those get for you folks, or how much information you're allowed access to. But that's just things that you might want to look over real well and again, maybe that's something that you need to pitch with your company, or maybe your company needs to improve on, is information that's contained in that case file. And then we'll talk and expound on some tools. So what do I mean by tools? Obviously, and you've heard it all along, if you've ever been involved in any kind of philosophical conversation or class or whatever it is, your mind is going to be your best tool. And how do you prepare your mind? We'll go over some of that stuff. Weapons, how can you prepare? Not necessarily how can you prepare weapons, but what weapons might you have available to access if you do have to defend yourself? Again, we're going to have to look at company policy, things like that, what you're allowed to carry. Now, from a personal standpoint, when I go someplace, either myself or my husband, we're always armed. We always carry concealed. And again, that's probably not something your company policy allows at work, but some of this stuff isn't necessarily just for work. It's behavior that you can utilize outside of work as well. When you're going to the store, when you're stopping at a gas station on your way to work, or whatever it may be. These are just things that you might consider then as well. Let me see here. Sorry, there's an email. Let me make sure that it's not something about this, and it is not. So we'll keep going. Okay. And what are some things that you can use as weapons? If things, everyday things, again, remember we discussed about how somebody in their home can realistically use almost anything as a weapon against you. But what can you potentially have access to that could be a weapon should you have to defend yourself as well? So I'm talking simple things like pens or keys, or something that a rigid object that you might keep access to. There's all kinds of items on the market that you can buy just super cheap that are basically just a hard plastic that can be something that you can obtain and use if you're needing to defend yourself, or obviously sharp objects, something like that, things that you could utilize. But what I stress when we talk about weapons is, do you know how to use them? Have you trained to use them? And is it something that you're actually going to be able to use? Is it realistic for you to gain access and utilize them? Or is it just something that maybe if you're purse or your bag or whatever you use gets strung around in a struggle, it's going to potentially be used against you. So in addition to those types of concerns and things that you need to consider, again, consider what you're carrying them in. Is it something that's going to be secured to you? I know just from other experiences, again, it's not like I was critiquing people that came into my house, but it is occupational hazard. So when they would come in, a couple of them, I noticed they would set their phone on a bedside or next to on a tabletop. If things go wrong, I no longer have access to that phone because my first goal is going to be to try to get away. So now I no longer have access to my phone. So I guess I would recommend always keeping your phone on you in some fashion. If you're carrying a bag that you access those things from, don't be somebody that's going to set that down. You're now responsible for what's in there. But again, if you set it down and you no longer have access to it, it's completely useless to you and could potentially be used against you. So just keep those things in mind also. When we train, again, I told you I would bring a little bit of this into my world, but when we train with our tools, obviously everything's in the same place. Now it's readily accessible because most of them are on a belt or a vest, and that's how we've trained every time. Like it's in the same place every time. So in the heat of the moment, we don't even have to think about where we're going to access that. When I carry concealed off duty, I call it a battle bag. I don't call it my purse, but in my battle bag, my gun is in the same place every time. I make sure before I go in someplace that it's still there. It's oriented how I need it oriented for safe, quick access if I need to do so. My extra mags are located in a place. And I know if it's not a world you've ever lived in, it sounds extreme. I understand that. But when we're talking self-defense and preparedness and being ready for when things go wrong, those are just things that you have to do. And then we'll talk about establishing those habits, making that awareness a habit. But when it comes to talking about establishing the habits with tools, if you change a location of something and it's always been in that same place all the time, your brain will go to the same place that it thinks it has been. So if you change something up, you have to train that way to establish those habits, to make it so that it's repetitive and your brain knows where it's at. So just some things to consider. A lot of people will ask about the products they can buy at Bass Pro or something like that. Maybe just the spray, which you might not realize this, but the spray that can be obtained by civilians is actually stronger than the stuff that law enforcement carries in a capacity in that it can cause damage. Like the stuff that OC that we carry, unless it's delivered at a super close range, it's not going to cause damage to the eyes. But the stuff that the bear spray or whatever that some people ask about, that's stuff that actually can cause a lot of damage. And it's going to be a lot stronger than like we carry, because our goal is to get this person under control without hurting them or ourselves as quickly as possible. So those are just some things to consider there as well. We talk about that mental Rolodex or those computer files. When I was training recruits, and I did that for quite a while. It wasn't just the 3 or 4 years that I was there. I was what we call a adjunct instructor for 3 or 4 years prior to that. So I did a lot of coming off the road, going into our training center, helping with the recruits, whatever it is. But one of the things that we talked about pretty extensively was this mental Rolodex. So if you can imagine, you've seen the cop shows, you've seen whatever the cop show may be, how many incidences can happen. Like things can go bad really, really quick in our world. We cannot train, no matter how many scenarios we put these recruits in, we cannot train adequately how to prepare for everything that can happen. So what we tell them to do is to develop this Rolodex of things that they've experienced mentally. So yes, predominantly in the highway patrols world, we do a lot of traffic stops. So in my brain, I have mentally prepared myself for what to do if I approach from certain locations on the cars, because we don't always approach from the driver's side. I've trained what to do in response to some kind of threat on the driver's side, on the passenger side, at the rear of the vehicle, at the front of the vehicle. I've walked through the entire scenario in my brain many times, just so that way, if something happens, my brain has something to reference, it has something to go to. So my reaction is significantly quicker than if it did not. So that's, to put that in your world, I would advocate for, we'll talk about approaching locations, we'll talk about things like that, but running through those scenarios in your brain of, if I'm sitting on a couch at this person's house and something goes bad, I'm running for the door, or I'm accessing whatever tool I have access to potentially defend myself. But running through those situations in your brain can really set you up for a lot of success in those events. And then again, we talked about training. Not only is it going to make you more swift, but it's also going to help your body, the physical part that your body needs to do, work quicker, and it's going to help everything work together better. So the more you can train, the more you can mentally prepare yourself for situations to go bad, the better off you're going to be in those situations should it happen. Mindset is going to be huge in anything when it comes to self-preservation. It's if you followed any stories of soldiers that have been involved in horrific things and the things that the body can physically withstand, it can be really, that's because their mindset was set to survival, not only surviving, but winning. So maybe you're not competitive. Maybe it's not something that was important in your life growing up, and that's fine. To me, it was very, and to this day, everything between my husband and I is still a competition. We compete when we throw the ball for the dog, whatever it is. It's just how our brains are wired. But even throughout our work, like he's been a trooper for 28 years, I've been for 20 years. So we've never accepted the fact that we would lose something, like not games necessarily. So yes, both of us are kind of sore losers, but when it comes to self-preservation and fighting for our lives, losing cannot be an option. In order to get to that, you have to understand that bad things can happen. Bad things do happen to some people. There are horrible people in this world, and mental health and issues like that it's not necessarily what that person is intending to do. They're not necessarily thinking about what's happening. So it doesn't always mean that there's horrible intent on their end, but bad things can happen. And on the flip side of that, there are people just out there to do bad things. So again, this isn't necessarily just in focused on home visits. This is in general everyday life as well. These tips that I'm giving you, these habits to establish, these things that we're talking about, is something that you should do at all times, not just necessarily during your home visits. So again, that losing cannot be an option, and for your survival, you may have to be, you have to be prepared to maybe do whatever it takes. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We might get into some things that you would never think that you would actually talk about or think about having to do to defend yourself. But that's unfortunately the reality of the situation when it comes to self-preservation and survival. Awareness, again, is going to be huge in everything we do. So it's not just for work. It's when we're going to a gas station, like I was talking about, or maybe we're in Walmart. We can't be in our phones. We can't be distracted by other things when we're out in public, just because And again, I know it sounds like I'm just constantly on edge and that I must be a super weirdo to hang around, but it's because I've developed these habits. Like we'll talk about the color codes and where I operate at in most of my everyday life. But those are just things that you have to establish. So when we're talking awareness as it pertains to pulling up to a house or as we're going into an establishment, again, we're going to talk about that parking, where is going to be best for us. Now, most of us want the most advantageous spot for us to get in there quick and get back out quick. And that's good. When I'm driving my POV, my personal vehicle, I like to park a ways away because I don't like door dings. So, and that may be something that you take into consideration as well. Is this an area, not necessarily door dings, I mean, we're talking self-preservation here predominantly, but is this an area where something might happen to my car, where it might get hit? Am I parking in a smart location so that way my only means of escape necessarily of getting away from that situation, is it something that I've provided the best avenue for that escape? So might be something to consider as you're pulling into places when you're going in. Definitely is something to consider. Things we're going to want to assess while we're making that approach to either the house or residence or even into the grocery store, whatever it is. Do things appear off? Like, is there something out of place? So is there an uneasy feeling? Am I, as I'm approaching this, are there threats and potential threats and the hairs going up on the back of my neck? In your world, I would back up and try to maybe reschedule that particular visit or something along those lines. In my world, we still have to approach. We do what's safe. We mitigate it the best we can, but I mean, we're there for that type of response. You are not necessarily there. Yes, you're there to help that person, but you need to worry about your safety first. So inside the residence, what are we going to assess there? Obviously, the first thing that I'm going to be looking for is, where is my out? If it goes bad, where can I get out of this situation? Next thing I'm going to want to look for is potential hazards. What are those potential weapons? Again, those dogs, those things that could be used against me to harm me. Those are just things that I need to be watching for. Trying to minimize, like when we're talking exits, how is my out? Don't let somebody in between you and that exit. Don't allow them to get you especially if it starts getting elevated in some fashion. Don't let them corner you. Don't let them put something in between you and that exit, because you want to be able to get out of there as quickly as possible. But that's something that, as you're making the contact with them, maybe you're establishing this good rapport and you're not noticing any red flags. There's really nothing bad about the situation. You can allow yourself to be comfortable, allow yourself to do your job, but don't overlook, what else might happen, the other people in the rooms, the other people or the animals or anything like that. So once you feel safe, that doesn't mean to let your guard down by any means, but you can kind of relax and assess from there. And again, make it a habit. Every place, every time you go somewhere, I have on here every person. It's okay to be judgy. It's matter of fact, in our world, we have to be judgy. I would think in your world as well, putting yourselves into other people's homes. Yes, you're trying to help. And again, most people are going to be very appreciative, but you just never know what might happen or who else might become involved. So it's okay to judge everybody. It's okay to, in your brain, be processing, does this person appear to be a threat? I mean, okay, so if I've got a person that's unable to walk or move and they start getting irritated with me. That might not be something that I want to leave immediately for. Like I might try to de-escalate the situation verbally a little bit and work with them more. But if this person's actually capable of walking and moving and getting to me and hurting me in your shoes, I would definitely make that exit being the first thing I'm going to do. That whatever I'm here to do is not worth my life or me potentially getting hurt. And I talked a little bit about the hairs on the back of your neck. Don't ignore that. A lot of times people try to overlook that and it gets them in trouble in all kinds of situations. So if your body is, something in your body is likely picking up on something going on, whether it's something you've seen or whether it's something you smell or whether it's something your ears are hearing, those instincts are there to protect you for a reason. We are fight or flight, that we are animals at our core. So that's what's instilled in us. A lot of us have, a lot of folks have trained to override that, to always pretend like the world's sunshine and rainbows all the time, and that's just not the case. So if something seems like it's going wrong, please pay attention. Try to focus on what it may be and respond appropriately, and we'll get into that some more here as we go. Okay, so awareness color code. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. How I operate on a general day-to-day basis. As I sit here in my office, yeah, I guess I didn't tell you that earlier. I'm doing this at my office at home because I figured it would be the least distractive place. My office is typically at a KDOT office. And and it's an old building and you can hear everything. So this is just the quietest place. My kids at school, very nice and quiet here. But even as I sit here in the comfort of my home, I am still listening to what might be happening outside. I'm still prepared that I can see all the doorways to my house. I've located myself that there's no threats going to come from behind me, because I know that I have to be paying attention to what I'm doing here. So I might be a little oblivious to what else is going on, but I've set that up. That's just how it works. And my husband also sometimes works from home, so we've set it up to work for us that way. But when we talk about this awareness color code, you'll see at the top there, that white, that it says unaware, unprepared, completely tuned out, oblivious to everything going on. Obviously that's not where we would want to be in our normal everyday life, because that's when bad things happen and they catch us off guard. Now, I talk about the condition yellow there at the bottom. I have the little note, everyday operation should be yellow. That means in general, we're going to want to operate in that relaxed but prepared. You're aware, you have good situational awareness, you're able to pick up on things that might start to go bad. And then there's that orange as things escalate. So a situation has arisen, your ears are picking up on something, your eyes are picking up on something, some input function of your brain is telling you, okay, we need to maybe get into this fight or flight situation. We need to activate, something might be happening. So that's when we're in that orange. Now, when our mind has determined that there is a threat and we have to do something, that's going to be that red situation. High alert, actively engaged in an emergency response for self-defense, for survival, for self-preservation. And then where else we want to stay away from is that black. That is when things have gotten so out of control and you haven't been able to maintain your composure and you're basically panicked or in shock. You can't function, you can't respond, nothing's going on. So that we definitely want to stay away from the white and we want to stay from those black areas. In most everyday life, we want to operate in that relaxed but prepared. We're paying attention, our head's not in our phone, we're hearing other things that might go on, and that's kind of where we want to operate for the most part. Like I said, even when I'm at home, I'm still prepared. I'm still thinking, and not always. I allow myself to relax. Obviously, I have to sleep sometime. We watch football games, we have friends over, we do normal things, but our way of life has become that we can make those transitions from one to the next very quick. And so if we pick up on something, that's something that we may have to adjust to. So just the more you do it, the less it's going to be something that you even think about. Like the more you operate where you're looking around, paying attention, listening, the less it's going to be difficult for you to do. So again, that's kind of training our brain to operate that way. Okay, so you've been in a situation like you're in the condition yellow. You're aware, you're prepared, and your brain is picking up on something. One of your input senses is saying there's a threat and we need to do something. So orange has happened, it's perceived something, and now red has happened. And we need to do something for that self-preservation. What you need to do, and if you're able to remain calm, that's going to help your brain process things. That's going to make your reaction a lot quicker. So remaining calm is going to be big, but that if you can escape, why wouldn't you? You know, why would you leave yourself in the situation if it's something you can escape from? Sorry, I had another email. Just want to make sure I wasn't missing somebody's message on here or something. But if you can remove yourself from that situation, if it starts to escalate, if somebody starts to get upset with you, just hit that door. There's no reason for you to stick around. I mean, why risk your self-safety for somebody that's upset with you? So I would imagine that there's company policy or protocols for most of that. If you start to feel uneasy, if you start to realize that the situation might be escalating, I would think that most companies are just leave, I would hope. But if you have questions again about that, please, we can try to address them, or that may be something that you need to address at your company or agency. So we're in that orange red, right? So again, we've determined that something needs to happen, and something needs to happen pretty quick. So yeah, I have all these animations and click through, but it's just easier for me to go through my list here. It's important that you don't hesitate. You don't tell yourself that this isn't happening. The key in that is preparing yourself that, again, the bad things can happen. The bad things could potentially happen. If you've made the awareness and the good habits of establishing, you know, those good practices of exits and being assessing things as your body or as you approach them, you're not going to be able to allow yourself to override that, right? Because you're already in that awareness mode. You're already in that self-preservation. So the likelihood of you overriding and saying, this isn't happening, and hesitating is hopefully omitted. But don't allow yourself to become oblivious to that. Again, we already talked about that, but that's huge when it comes to actually having to respond for self-preservation. When it comes time to act, you're going to have to act, and you're going to have to act hard, and you're going to have to act quick. And the reason for that is because you're on the reaction end. So reaction obviously is going to be slower than an action, right? So somebody coming at me to hurt me, now I'm taking that second and a half where I have to process everything that's happening, and now I have to react and figure out what it is I'm going to do. Or hopefully I've already, again, established in my mental Rolodex some things that I can go to. So now my brain has something to quicker access. So when I do that, I'm going to have to respond hard and fast. It's very, because you don't know how much time you're going to have to do it, right? Like and we'll talk a little bit about targets and tactics. If I slowly try to push somebody back with my hand, now I've given them something to grab onto for me. If I try to push them away, but they're determined to be a significant threat, I should be responding in a way that I'm making sure that they can't still aggress me. And that may mean that I have to put my thumb in their eye. Again, I told you it might get a little gross, but that may mean that I have to strike them in the face with my hand. There's just certain things that I may have to do in that situation, but doing so quickly and aggressively is going to be key. Being loud. Again, it's not just in somebody's residence. Maybe nobody will hear you, but maybe there's that neighbor walking by outside, and now there's the scuttle inside that they're picking up on, and so now they can come help. So being loud is going to be key as well. Doing whatever it takes. We'll talk about those target areas, utilizing weapons. As soon as you can get out of there, do so. And of course, it's going to be huge to maintain your breathing. That helps your brain process and helps you respond appropriately. So we're going to talk about these target areas. I've got this little picture down here, and we'll talk about using some weapons, but we'll try to focus and please, again, ask questions at the end on what weapons you might have access to, what you can utilize as weapons. So these target areas, these are really good, except I would say the foot, anything below the waist is not going to be necessarily super effective on somebody that is aggressing me in a manner that they intend to hurt me, because it takes some time and it takes significant strikes to those locations if to stop anybody. Now, we talk about the pelvic girdle. We do in our world about utilizing that as a target of maybe blunt force, or maybe that's, I know that this is just in our world, but if it's something that we have to utilize our firearm and the upper hydraulics area isn't successful for us, maybe that's something that we can take out that structure to potentially prevent them from aggressing. But the significant impact that it takes to actually affect somebody's movement in those areas that is actively aggressing me, that is engaged in hurting me, and that is they're determined to hurt me, it would take. So I try to suggest in those situations to stay away from those. Now, those can be good distraction techniques for those people that aren't necessarily that amped up, that aren't that focused on hurting me. Those can be good distraction techniques. They're just trying to maybe figure out how to get out of the situation. So I can maybe see this in your world of maybe an aggressive patient that has dementia coming at me. Those might be some strike areas that I would utilize that aren't quite as forceful as maybe the eyes or the throat. Now, when we start talking eyes and throat, those are going to be pretty debilitating areas, meaning that if I am able to, again, use my thumb or use a pen or something to those areas, that is, my life is depending on it. Like, it's not just a situation of I need to calm this person down. It's a fight for my life, and these are the targets that I go for. Eyes, obviously, if you're able to take out the eyes in some fashion, that's going to be huge. They can't get at what they can't see, right? So again, the throat, that's going to be another one, but that can take significant amount of force as well to actually cause damage enough to stop a determined threat. Now, you always see when people are coming at somebody on TV or whatever, the first thing they go for is the nose. And although it can be very distracting, it's not necessarily always a great first target, just because it's a very hard structure for one. So usually it's a pretty small structure, obviously not as small as the eyes or the throat, but it's a pretty. If I'm going to strike to the nose, most people would say that they're going to punch them in the face or something. Somebody comes at me, I'm going to punch them in the face. I'm not going to use a traditional punch. And the reason for that is because that can hurt me. That can break my hand. And then that kind of throws my hand out of potentially being able to use it for something else as in my self-preservation. So I would use what we call a palm heel strike, which is, if you look at your hand right now, the palm area of that, right next to the thumb, and the outside portion, that's going to be where I would strike those hard targets with. Again, that's going to make less damage to me, make me more useful to strike again if I need to. So those are just some things to consider there as well. Again, those are just common target areas. If you have some questions about it, this is where doing these techniques in person is if you're able to, that's something that you're able to do with your company. I don't advocate for just going around to your coworkers and doing it, but maybe it's something where you can set up some type of a self-defense class, and we can come in and work on some of those techniques with you. So that's just kind of giving you a real quick brief exposure to some common good target areas here. Again, avoiding anything below the waist unless you're in more of a just like a gain distance from this person. They're not actively aggressing and determined. It's just I need to do something and to gain a little distance, maybe slow them down just a little bit so I can get out of here type thing. But the more aggressive strikes are going to be to that facial structure in the manner described. So, and then what can we do after? What should we do after? So the events happened. Hopefully we've made it to our car and we can get out of there. And now what do we do? Obviously, it's going to be key to breathe. You're going to be wound up. Your heart rate's going to be high. That's just the physiology of the body. That's what happens. But it's in order to slow that down and to help your brain process, like, okay, where do I go now? Where is the next safest place for me to go? I'm going to have to do that breathing. I'm going to have to calm myself down so I can think, I can process what's best, because your brain can only, in a threatening event, your brain can only work so far ahead. And actually, typically it's not working ahead. It's just kind of going through the motions of what's happening at this time. It's obviously prioritizing what the most imminent threat is. So as you're able to breathe, open up your brain, able to process more, help you get to that safe place, do that self-assessment. Make sure that you're not hit, make sure that you haven't sustained some type of a significant injury. If you're able to drive away, park in a safe spot. Now, what are going to be your safe places? Hopefully, like a fire station, or maybe it's a well-lit public area, a store where you can get out, and if you need to get out and start asking somebody for help, if you're not able to function very well, maybe that's a good place for that. In some of our classes, we talk about like being involved in a road rage incident, things like that. We talk about driving to the nearest police station. So maybe that's something that you can do because you don't quite feel safe. Maybe this person, it was somebody that was in the house with this person. Now they're in their car following you and you're trying to get away. I know that sounds pretty extreme, but again, that's part of that mental Rolodex, preparing yourself for things that might happen. Where would be a good place to go? I would find the nearest police station and drive there, or again, maybe a fire station, something like that, something where you know there is help for you. Call 911, file a report. What I mean by that is don't just overlook. So maybe the situation wasn't huge. Maybe it was just this person gets up out of their chair and they start aggressing you. They're upset with you being there. And so now you've left. But filing a report, obviously you still want that person. You still probably care about this person or doing your job. So maybe 911 needs to go respond there to go check on their welfare. They need to follow up with this person, that not just completely write them off, right? Like, okay, they wronged me, but maybe 911 needs to go, police need to respond and go check and make sure that they didn't hurt themselves or somebody else. But file that report. Why file that report? So there's some kind of reference to what may happen if maybe there's another call for a different agency down the road at the same place, and they're able to to gain some information of things you may have experienced. But that documentation is going to be huge. What I will say is, if you're involved in something that you've had to significantly respond with some type of force, and you've maybe hurt or killed somebody, you're going to be required to provide some information, but I would highly recommend talking to an attorney first, just because it is a very litigious world that we live in now. So I would talk to a lawyer, just so a lot of things can be twisted, used against you, even when you're the one that was being attacked. So that would be my recommendation for something like that. You're going to trust certain people, but be careful who you talk to. Don't go tell everybody, or don't post on Facebook what may have happened, or Instagram or anything like that, just because that stuff can potentially be used against you at a later date. So be very careful what you say, but do what you have to do. If it's a safety concern, obviously, say what needs to be said to get the concern addressed. And if necessary, seek additional support. What I mean by that is, a lot of times these traumatic events cause significant mental health issues, and it's something that you should have addressed, and maybe seek some help for. So yeah, even in our world, I mean, yes, we encounter trauma a lot in our careers, but if we have no out for that, if we have nobody to talk to, if we haven't established healthy ways to deal with it, it can become very detrimental to us. And again, it's something that we deal with frequently, so you'd think that we'd be the pros with it, but it can definitely add up. So that's kind of where I'm at with everything, as far as just a real quick exposure. Again, it'd be great if we could get in there and do some techniques. If there was a place that we could provide that type of training for. I know it wouldn't be something that we could repeat a lot in most cases, but at least it would give you something. But if you have any questions, I would prefer email, or we can try to answer as many as you might have right now. But if you have something come up down the road, that QR in the middle of the screen does work. It takes you right to my contact information on our KHP website. But again, this isn't the only class that I give. We give all kinds of classes. So if you have any questions, feel free to go with them. Anything at all. Oh, let's see if I can go up here. Oh, what's in the chat? Okay. Okay, I see on here, I know a Rolodex. I should have seen that earlier. That's funny. Would it help to spray their eyes? And again, yes, it definitely would. But is that something that you've trained for? Is that something that you know how to access that information? But most definitely, if you can gain something to slow them down, to spray in those eyes, yep. I've taken OC about 3 or 4 times, and that's our grade of OC, oleoresin capsicum, what it's called. It's what you might hear is mace or whatever. If a determined person can still see, then they can still gain access potentially. So make it, again, it's something that you would have to train with. I wouldn't advocate for just buying something and hoping you're going to be able to function it. Now, a lot of those are one-use sprays. So then I would get maybe a trainer, or maybe buy 2 of them so I can test one, not on myself, because a lot of those are pretty strong. But I would get something maybe similar, so with the same operational system. Some of them are a thumb spray, some of them are a trigger spray, something like that. But get something with the same operational system so that you can become familiar with it. Great question. Let's see if there's another one. Anything can be used as a weapon. My question is about a messenger bag that crosses. Is that something recommended? Yeah, so actually that's what I use. I use my battle bag is a whatever they call it, a crossbody carry. I definitely do like the securement of it. I have one that is like right in front of me where my chest is. It's actually a little lower so I can access whatever I need to in there. But then my other one, my bigger battle bag, is it's kind of more like a purse, but yet it's still a crossbody carry. So I've again practiced with actually accessing my weapon out of there several times. So good question. Is that something you recommend? Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, work with young children in the home, handle situations where children are present. Yeah, so we encounter those two. Again, if it's a self-preservation thing, it's not going to change much because your brain is prioritizing and you can't really um, I mean, in our world with our firearms and stuff, we train and we think about if we have to shoot this direction, what's beyond that wall, what's maybe things that we can't see that we could potentially hurt somebody else. Obviously, that's not the same for you. And I would, yeah, you can't, if it's a significant threat, you can't really worry about the children so much. I imagine that it would be incredibly chaotic if something happened that you had to respond to with children present. There'd be a lot of screaming, so that might be something where you are able to utilize some training ahead of time within your company. And again, this sounds probably strange to people who have never thought of this, but if you can set up scenarios, if you guys have training days or something like that, where you're able to set up a scenario where things do become not necessarily violent, but even loud, and how your employees or how somebody might respond to those situations, and maybe having those children or some kind of child around, maybe it's your own child, whatever, for the training situation, whatever, but able to provide that, because even in our world, throwing children into the mix, if it's not something that you've trained and have simulated, it can be very alerting, something that might cause hiccups or hesitation in response. So great question, definitely very good question. But I don't think that we can necessarily worry about the children and how they may be freaking out or whatever if in a self-preservation mode. Now, if it's that dangerous of a situation, could I live with myself if I didn't try to help that child and do something with them? So maybe trying to gain, control of them or whatever, take them with me if it's that volatile of a situation. Now, maybe that child's used to that situation. Maybe that's an environment that they're used to, but that's not necessarily for you to address. That'd be something that I would definitely call 911 and have them look into the situation. But good question. Sorry, my answer is probably kind of vague, but it's hard to answer that without being involved in the situation, without understanding it completely, I suppose. Anything else? Well, this is a long one. Okay. I guess my question here is, can everybody see the questions? Or do I need to read them out loud?
They should be able to
Okay.
see the question. Yes.
Oh yeah, awesome, great. Yeah, that would be healthy start home. Okay, so I didn't know exactly who my audience would all be. If it'd be a lot I, like I said, with my mother-in-law, I envisioned it'd be a lot of people visiting home health like that, but that's very interesting. Um, that's what you do. Very cool. Oh, good. I'm glad you found it helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Well, if you guys, again, if you have a question and you don't want to put it on the group chat or whatever, feel free to email me. You can call or text, but email is preferred just because after this, I've got to make about 7 or 8 phone calls for car seats and all that stuff. So the rest of my day might get a little busy, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.